Welcome everyone. My name is Ildy Morris, and this session is going to be on working with subject matter experts, strategies for learning design success. So the topics I'm going to cover, quick introductions about sort of me and my background. Then I'm going to talk about, what is a subject matter expert, or SME for short. And then I'm going to cover sort of really my methodology of how I work with experts throughout the whole project lifecycle, starting from project discovery all the way through to course launch. So this will be very focused on, where a subject matter expert is involved in each of these stages, some of the templates that I use to sort of help support that process. And then I'll cover a few pitfalls and strategies. Would also love to hear, any challenges that any of you have come across, so we can talk about that too, and then we'll end with some questions. So just a few things about me. So I'm basically a freelance learning designer. I work primarily with open edX clients, but I've worked with all kinds of clients, big ones like Pearson, small ones like NGOs, startups, nonprofits. So I've had a wide range of experience with all kinds of clients and all kinds of course design. And then prior to doing this for 6 years, I worked at edX, heading up their training and partner enablement programs. So I used to teach course teams how to build courses on the platform, really leverage the tools of Studio. And then before that, I did about, 10 years or so of just learning design consulting for corporations. So again, sort of a varied mix of experience. And I'm just curious for the people in the room, how many people here have worked on a project sort of either as a learning designer or someone else with a subject matter expert? Okay, it's a bunch of people. How many people here have actually been a subject matter expert? Okay, almost the same, excellent. How many people here have had challenges either working with or being a subject matter expert? Okay, everyone should raise their hands, exactly. Who hasn't, right? Like what project has gone perfectly? So like I said, I'd love to talk more about that towards the end. So just in case anyone isn't clear, a subject matter expert has the specialist skills, knowledge, and experience in a particular field. My perspective on an expert is that they should be the main resource for providing, reviewing, and approving content in the course. So, and I'm talking about a course that, maybe there's some content I'm, had to take a position, and so this presentation is based on sort of working with a client that has some content but really needs support building it out. Obviously, there's some clients who have a lot of content and it's easier, but in this scenario, this is more of like the high-touch scenario of collaborating with a subject matter expert. And subject matter experts can take many shapes and sizes. They could be the client itself, if it's a startup or a really small organization. They could be a team member, a colleague of the client, but they're on the same team and they're aligned in their goals. A SME could also, though, be someone from a totally different department, and that's a little more removed from the project themselves, and that might take a little more encouragement. And then sort of the fourth level is they could be someone who's hired from outside, brought within for their expertise and that content to help ensure the course is successful. So these are sort of the wide varieties of the SMEs. But the main thing to know about a subject matter expert is that they will be integral to the success of your project. And I've worked with a lot of different course teams over the years, and I think that a lot of people kind of make an assumption, oh, we have the subject matter expert, we're set. And no, you're not set. You may have a person there. That doesn't mean that they are ready and available and understand really what's being asked of them. It doesn't mean that they're going to be fully supported to be successful. And I feel like as a learning designer and as a vendor, that is really like, my role. That is our role, to provide that support for the subject matter expert to help them do what they need to do and then ultimately have a successful project. So what are some of the challenges of working with SMEs? So one is, generally speaking, these are very busy people in very high demand, right? So right there, you're going to have a few barriers to entry. They may not know about this project that they've been brought into. They may not be aligned with the goals of the project. Again, you don't necessarily know what their background is. Another challenge is they still might be midstream in developing the content, and you're kind of brought in a little too early because people get very excited about launching a course, and this poor expert is here still researching and writing and not quite ready to go. Or the expert may, get involved in the project, decide, you know what, this, A here isn't really that important, it's really B. They may change their mind about the focus and the content. They also might be overly invested in the outcome. Like this might be their baby, this might be their research. They want it presented in a really particular way. They might have seen some course somewhere and they have it like in their brain that this is what it's going to look like, and it may not be aligned with your vision of what you think it should look like, right? So be prepared for that. Or conversely, especially for experts that are hired from outside, they may not be invested enough in the outcome. They might not feel empowered to share their content knowledge. They might not feel part of the team. They might not have, feel like they have that opportunity. And so you really have to like draw them out. So variety of challenges depending upon the project, the scenario, and really who's involved. So the general formula that I go for when I work on a project is you can't just have a good relationship with an expert. You also have to have a methodology around content management. Like the two have to work, lockstep, side by side. You can't just, have sort of good content without feedback. You can't get feedback without good content. So I really try to scaffold each stage of the course development process with sort of different focus with my relationship with the expert, sort of the time required, and also some of the templates that I use. So this is sort of, and I've really kind of dumbed this down a little bit, but at a high level, these are sort of the 6 stages that I tend to be involved in with launching a project from start to finish. So starting with project discovery, this is like the initial call, like nothing's been signed, there's no contract, there's no statement of work. This is pre-sales, so to speak. But the relationship building starts there. And then, assuming it progresses, we go to statement of work, and then the actual course design process, then the course develop process, which is sort of the writing of the curriculum, and then the course build, QA, and then finally the course launch. So I'm going to describe sort of what I think are the best practices around subject matter expert touch points at each of these stages. So during project discovery, pre-sales, this is really your first and I wouldn't say your only opportunity, but the pressure's on to really start to build credibility and to really start building relationship with this potential client. And one of the ways that I do this, and this is sort of drawing upon some consulting background, is to really demonstrate active listening, right? And so one way to do that is while the client's talking about the project and describing it, if I'm not clear, like I will ask clarifying questions, I'll capture notes, and at the end I'll provide a synopsis of my interpretation of the project, get validation from them. It's very basic, but it's also very empowering because they feel heard, and I feel like I know actually what they're talking about. So it's like a win-win both ways. I also try to start from the very beginning to build rapport because I'm also getting to know this client too and trying to figure out if this is going to be a good fit for me, right? Like not every project is perfect for everyone. And so I just try to understand what their working style is like, even their interests sometimes, never get personal. But I think it's good to be a little human, like actually get to know this person that you're potentially going to be spending a lot of time with, or this team, and it's well worth the effort. So my template that I use, again, I believe in simple and accessible. I go through these sort of 5 areas during the project discovery call. Really try to understand what are the actual goals of the project, okay? So these are not the nitty-gritty learning objectives. These are just the overarching goals, like why are you even doing this? Who wants you to do this? What are you hoping to gain by the end of building this course or this program of courses? The next thing is audience analysis, and it's really important up front to make sure that everyone's aligned on who is the intended audience. And also to think long-term, because as we know, building online courses, it's a lot of work, it's a lot of effort. You don't want to necessarily build something that's only going to be, relevant for a few months. So, I always ask the client, not just what is your intended audience right now, but like thinking down the line in the future, like who do you expect to come to your course? And that might be different. And also try to get an idea of the number of learners. Like, is this going to be sort of a small rollout, or are you thinking you really want to get thousands of learners? So it's good to understand the scale in the beginning too. The other thing I always try to understand is what is the learner motivation? Like, why are they going to take your online course with the millions of other courses out there? So is it people who want to upskill or reskill their career? Is it people who are perhaps looking for a pathway to credit? Is it a credit-bearing course itself? Whatever it is, or a certificate they can put on LinkedIn to capture the motivation for the learner. And then the next thing I try to understand in the beginning is, all right, so what have you got? Like, what content do you have? Like, do you have a whole facilitator-led course that just needs to be moved to an online environment? Or, kind of back to my other example, are you still working on the research or the product and it's really very much in flux? So try to understand where they are with the content. And then finally, what are the platform requirements? So, do they have an LMS? Do they need an LMS? Are they going to be using third-party tools, outside discussion forums, whatever it is? So really try to capture, at least at a high level, what are the technical requirements. Okay, so assuming everything goes well and I like them, they like me, we're aligned, then I start working on the statement of work. And again, my touch point with a subject matter expert during this stage is right out of the gate setting expectations on the level of effort to complete the project. Because I feel like a lot of subject matter experts get dragged into these things and they have no idea what they've been dragged into or what they've signed up for. So right from the start is in writing. I always make sure the expert has an opportunity to review the statement of work themselves, really call it out so they get it from the start. And then also describing the team members' roles and responsibilities. So I'm not saying necessarily we have to identify so-and-so's a project manager or so-and-so's a learning designer, but really more along the lines of who is going to be the project manager. For a lot of smaller organizations, I will end up being the project manager, which is fine. For bigger organizations, it'll be someone else. So really, again, being very clear about roles and responsibilities. And if there's more than one subject matter expert, who has the final say? Right? So I've come across that scenario before where you'll have like a team of people and they might not always be in agreement. I have this luxury because I work as a vendor with clients. I build in financial and timeline incentives for the client to remain on track, right? So, and I'm not overly punishing about this, but just kind of laying it out that, hey, if the scope of this project changes, there will be an impact on the delivery and on the cost, and just be prepared for that. And then finally, really trying to identify any risks. So for example, does somebody know for a fact that in 3 months, the expert is going to be on vacation for a month or on sabbatical or whatever it is? So trying to upfront identify what would be any potential risks to the project and try to mitigate for them in advance. And maybe you won't have all the answers, but at least you'll be sort of aware and everyone will be sort of expecting that something will have to be figured out down the line. So again, at a very high level, everyone's seen the statement of work. I won't belabor this, but I lay out the deliverables, the time estimate for each of the deliverables, and examples of deliverables that are very typical could be the sort of approved curriculum map, the actual course script, the course build, and then any kind of facilitator or team training to actually run the course. I think it's really important to not just focus on the build, but the delivery too. And then again, to identify what are the milestones, there's a milestone when we get the curriculum map done, check, and so on and so forth. Explaining the project team roles and responsibilities, that would be my addendum. And then if any changes to the project happen, they will be mutually discussed with the vendor and the client, and we'll come up with a solution. And it may cost more money and time, or maybe we swap one thing for another, very, very flexible on that front. And then I also include an assumptions section, right? So after these conversations, I've learned that even though people talk about things, if you don't actually write it down somewhere, they will forget, myself included. So the assumptions will be really basic things, like, for example, what is going to be the format of the deliverable that I share with the client? Is it going to be a Google Doc? Is it going to be a Microsoft Word document uploaded to a box somewhere? Whatever it is. So, have that in there. What's their content management approach? Where are we going to share the content? Where are we all going to work and have access together? Clarifying the availability of the client and myself. I'm not always 100% available, and just laying that out. And again, confirming the platform requirements that are going to be used for the specific project. So again, we have it all in writing and we're all aligned. Okay, so course design. So for me, the first step of the course design is really a kickoff meeting. So we have the statement of work signed. Now we're ready to roll up our sleeves and get to work. So the first thing I do is I actually revisit the information I captured in my discovery call, the project goals, the audience, the motivation, because we've all worked with organizations, and the one thing they all have in common is they change all the time. So I make sure that what we talked about originally, because it could be months ago, hasn't changed or evolved. And so I go through that, we validate that. And then I partner with a SME, and this could be one, depending upon how well developed the content is, because this could be one meeting, this could be a few design sessions, but really making sure that we're going to nail down the learning objectives, the assessment strategy, and the curriculum map, which I will go into in a little more detail later. And then at that point, I go deeper with the content. All right, so you've told me at a high level what you have for content. Now let's go deeper and really explore. And at that point, the expert is expected to really start thinking about, okay, what else do we need to get to fill any of the gaps? And then finally, to update if needed any the expectations around the project timing. So now that I have a much better understanding, I can actually build out a more detailed project plan or work with their project manager to do that. So at this point, the two milestones that I'm aiming for is a finalized project plan and curriculum map. And both things we know will evolve and shift somewhat, but we hope not too much. So the templates I use for this, so how many people have heard of backwards design? I know it's sort of like the thing. I haven't found a methodology for myself that I like better. I just think it really calls for creating a very streamlined curriculum design process. So it's beginning with the end in mind. It's by Wiggins and McTeague, the book Understanding by Design, if you're curious where the methodology came from. But essentially, you start with the learning objectives. What is it that you want learners to know and be able to do? Then you define the assessment strategy. How will you know that learners have learned the content you want them to know and be able to do, essentially? And then from there, you build out the course curriculum. So that's essentially the flow that I follow. I have a very simple template to do that. So what I'll do is, once the learning objectives are defined, I will plug them into that left column. This is really high tech, let me tell you. No, we're a technology company, but I still like simple is still helpful, because again, not every subject matter expert is technical either, right? Like their backgrounds are very diverse. I will give it a draft lesson name. I will, we'll talk about what assessment would map to that learning objective and describe that assessment. And then I will sit down with the expert and be like, okay, what content would support that learning objective? And I will literally type it in there. It'll be links to articles or to textbooks or whatever it is, and I will plug it in there in that course content column. And at that point, the work session will kind of stop, and I will go away, and I will review the content and look at all this, and I will start to work out what the lesson is going to look like at that point. And then I will bring the curriculum map back to the subject matter expert and the client, have them review it, talk them through, okay, I'm thinking in this lesson, maybe we'll do, a team project. This one should be whatever, a self-paced exam, whatever the requirements are, and sort of talk them through at a high level, like this is what I think we should do for this course, but really laying it out pretty clearly. And again, the goal here is that, if they have suggestions, I'll have an opportunity to incorporate them. If I use a piece of content, weighted it too heavily, and I need to weight something else, they can tell me that. So again, this is like sort of the precursor to actually writing out the course script. So then we move to the course develop stage. And this is probably where the subject matter expert touch point is the highest, and after this it goes down. Thank goodness for them. So this is when I take that curriculum map, I sit down and I start actually writing out the course script itself, like each page, how it's going to be laid out. It's sort of a combination of like a storyboard, but it's actually all the text and all the links and all the graphics and everything that's going to go into the course. So much like the woman who gave that awesome video talk yesterday, I don't know if she's here or not, but the idea is anyone can pick up this document and go build, because sometimes, not very often, sometimes I'm doing the building, but more often someone else is doing the building, like a development team that I might work with, or the client has a development team and just hand it over to them. So some of the strategies for building efficiency for working with subject matter expert is, I can't tell you, like my heart, I was in this one call and this poor professor raises his hand. He's like, so how do you like manage questions about the content? So I'm like, well, what I do is I kind of build out one lesson or module at a time, collect all the questions in that draft document and share it with them all at once. He's like, oh, thank goodness, because other people I've worked with, I'll just get like 20 emails a day with like individual questions, right? So you don't want to barrage the subject matter expert with like, oh, I have a question about this. Oh, 2 hours later, I have a question about that. Like you're going to burn them out so fast, it's not even funny. So I try to be super organized about my questions, clarifications, put it all in the doc, share it with them, one module at a time. It also helps them because they don't have to do so much context switching, right? Like we know how hard that is. So they can look at this one lesson, lock on to the whole lesson, start to finish, and make their edits and answer my questions. Occasionally, and depends on the client and the content and sort of how comfortable we all are with each other. Like I had one client where we found out halfway through we could not get the rights to use the textbook that they wanted to use, which is a big bummer. So I kind of went out, I'm like, okay, this isn't rocket science. So I went out and I looked around at other textbooks that seemed similar and sort of presented them to the subject matter expert, like, I did the first round of due diligence, which ones you think will work, and they were thrilled that I saved them a little bit of time, a little bit of work. So if something is easy and you can come up with a quick and easy solution to replace content, just do it. No one's gonna like fault you for it, and if they disagree, they will let you know. No problem about that. And then again, while I'm working on writing these out, I will share each module with the incorporated feedback, and I sort of work in tandem. So if the subject matter expert is reviewing module 1, I start working on module 2, and then when they're reviewing module 2, I start working on module 3, so there's always something going. So again, at the end of this process, and again, this is sort of the longest, most labor-intensive period, my goal is to get sign-off on the course script, okay? So I don't even touch Studio until I get signed off on this, because there's nothing that's gonna waste time more than starting to put content in Studio and having to go in and change it, like as we all know. So that is the approach. Again, my template, super simple. I do have a little color code. I have also learned though that not everyone understands the Studio terminology. Not everyone gets what is a section, what is a subsection, what is a unit, they don't care. So I know what it is, that's all that really matters. Or if the development team doesn't know, I have a little key up there, but essentially I map it to terminology that works for learners, for end users, like lesson or module or page of content. Like here on the left, I have left menu bar, where basically you're gonna have the section and the subsection titles, and then the actual course content will be the components within each of the units, right? So I use English, and I just find this is easier for people who are not familiar with Studio to kind of wrap their head around. Okay, course build, QA. At this point, not a very high-touch time period with a subject matter expert, but one thing I do, just due diligence, because again, it's one thing to look at something on paper, it's a whole other thing to look at it online. I will build out or have one module built out, and that's it, and I will share it with a client and be like, this is kind of your last chance to, choke or whatever, or give a thumbs up. So, I will not go and build the entire course and then be like, here it is. I want them to see, something and have an opportunity to iterate sort of one last time. I just think it's fair, and it's a little bit more of an agile approach. And again, things that we think look good on paper may not always look so great online. So that is one thing I'll do, but if they are happy with it or we make changes and adjustments, then have the whole course built out, and then have the client get involved in the QA process, whatever that might look like. And again, the QA is quality assurance, for those who don't know, has been really different with different clients I've worked with. Like I've worked with some who've got QA teams, right? And they'll have 3 different people with different backgrounds going through the whole course, and you get these multiple spreadsheets back with all this really detailed feedback. And other people are like, oh, I'll just go through it as a learner, and here's my email of feedback, So it really varies, and I, again, try to understand at the start, what is the approach going to be? Having said that, I have my own approach as well, because as we all know, things can be a little hidden in Studio sometimes. So it's a little dated, but this is essentially, who here remembers the course launch checklist from edX? Yeah, you guys remember that? So this is like my version of it. Essentially, I just kind of go through and make sure, these different areas are set up correctly, because especially when there's like a lot of courses being built simultaneously, it can be easy to forget to like turn the wiki off if you're not using it, or like add, number of days early available for beta testers in the advanced settings. These little quirks that we all know if we are familiar with Studio. So this is the kind of content that I'll have in my course launch checklist. If the subject matter expert or the client is familiar with Studio, or I feel like they're very hands-on, I will share this with them as well. But I don't necessarily share this with all the clients all the time, because it's a lot. And then I also get into, the grading policy, make sure all the subsections are, set up correctly, and all the things that we do for, to make the course, meet the requirements. And then finally get to course launch. So again, give the client ample opportunity to review the course, give any feedback that they're going to, I'll incorporate that feedback or have the team incorporate the feedback. And then this is also the stage where I will often provide additional training or support for whomever is running the course or facilitating the course. Okay, so even for a self-paced course where you don't have discussion forums or facilitators, you still want the client to know how to like go into the instructor dashboard and see how many people got a certificate or how many enrollments there are, or that kind of thing. So I have these sort of templatized little facilitator guides or course management guides, whatever you want to call them. And I will often give, it just takes a short training to kind of walk them through and show them what they need to do that. And then finally, celebrate the launch, like send a celebratory email, like, woohoo, we push the button, it's out there, it's live. Let's, applause our efforts in making this go live. And then I will often jump in and kind of monitor the enrollments too, because I'm curious. I want to see how things are going as well. So this is just one example of a facilitator guide that I put together for a professor who didn't know Studio at all, had just switched over from Moodle, and so I tried to make it really clear, like, here's what you need to know in the discussion forums and the features and functionality. So in addition to giving this live training, I'll often capture it for them as well as a reference. Okay, so let's talk about some other pitfalls and strategies. It's not a perfect world. Change happens. People are, life is lifey. Some common things that have happened for me or that I've seen happen on projects is halfway through the project, your SME is not available and someone new shows up. And you're told, oh, don't worry, this person knows everything that person did and they're fully on board, no problem. So don't believe them, okay? Like, not because they're intentionally lying, but because everyone just has the best of intentions. But I've definitely learned the hard way that it's totally worth to take the little extra time to meet individually with this new subject matter expert, walk them through what the project has done so far, the curriculum map, the learning objectives, the approach, so on and so forth, and do it one-on-one. So they're not like embarrassed to ask questions in front of their boss or whoever they're with. So I always do this one-on-one. It's a very transparent forum. They can ask me whatever clarifying questions they need, and I can fill them in on how the project's been going. And that little extra effort up front is going to save so much effort down the line, because if you have a subject matter expert with a totally different vision, you're going to be completely derailed from that point forward, and might have to go back and redo the whole thing, which has happened. Okay, another pitfall is change in course content mid-project. And so that could be, again, the missing textbook, right? Or it could be this content is very time sensitive and some world event has happened, like a pandemic, and this whole content is blown up and we have to like go back and redo it. And that's fine, it is what it is. I think just as a general guideline, I try to say, okay, let's stick as close to the original as possible, maybe try to swap out one piece of content for this new content if you want to remain in scope. Sometimes it's going to cost a little more, and if you're willing to do that, that's fine, we can do that, but really just try to stick to the original plan as much as you absolutely can. Third scenario, the subject matter expert is unavailable. maybe they're sort of half available some of the time, maybe all available some of the time, but they're really not there as often as you need them to be. So at this point, very transparent, very clear communication with a client. Sorry, so-and-so is just really busy. Is there anybody else who could fill in? And maybe this person could still play sort of the final say, overarching role, like still give them that sort of, leadership position, but to get involved in like the weeds and the daily Q&A, really put the onus on the client to find a replacement, because that is their responsibility. And like I said, I have the luxury of they have a financial incentive to do that, right? And then the last and probably the hardest, and there's no easy answer for this, your subject matter expert doesn't agree with your learning design. They don't like your course. Like I said, they had a vision for something totally different, or they had a vision for something that would like blow the budget like out of the water, and it's just not possible. So, I just do the best I can do. So I go back to basics, remind them of what was the intended goal, the guidelines, the budget that we all agreed upon, the curriculum maps, so on and so forth. And then I'll also pull in like outside examples. So if it's a course on, biology, I'll be like, hey, this other university did a course on biology like this too, and really try to pull on real world examples. Because again, I think for many people, it's hard to imagine things. It's much easier to kind of look at things. So I always try to find relevant examples to the design that I'm proposing. I will also sometimes ask the project sponsor for support. Again, very transparent, like, hey, subject matter expert is not aligned. Could you maybe talk to them and see what the issues are and get back to me? And then the last thing I do is I'll be like, okay, fine, we will do it your way, but do me a favor, let's throw in a learner survey. Let's make this a data-driven decision-making process. And put a learner survey in. You should have one anyway, but if there isn't one, put one in, and maybe you can put in a few questions that are related to your ideas. I don't know. But the general idea is to really kind of get feedback from the learner. And this did happen to me once, and it was successful. And I actually had the person come back to me and say, "You were right," which I never hear. So I have to publicize it. But yeah, the learners had said, "Yeah, we wish we had more like knowledge checks along the way that would help prepare us for this final high stakes exam," like sort of something really basic like that. So, so if all bets are off, maybe turn to the learner and try to get the voice of the learner to help build your case for successful learning design. Okay, so in conclusion, and I know I've gone through a lot, but my general guidelines are, to be flexible. Course development is demanding, and particularly with subject matter experts, there's definitely a learning curve there. So if you're working with someone who's never done this before, just be prepared. Not only are they going to be spending time working with you on getting content, they're going to be spending time learning how this whole thing works. So just sort of be flexible and empathetic, and remember that. And then the other piece with the empathy is, as I mentioned in the very beginning, a lot of experts have whole other demands on their time. Like they are juggling a lot, and so your project may not be the top of their priority list all the time, and you just kind of have to work with that the best you can. But finally, be professional. Like you are there to add value. You are there to, share your expertise. And so just because you might feel sort of shut down and not heard and not listened to, like, I know it's hard, and it's certainly hard for me, like don't take it personally, just be professional and be like, look, the research says this, my experience says that, and this is what I'm recommending, and let's talk through what the issues are. Like don't necessarily just sort of back down because they don't agree with you right away. That has been my experience. So that's pretty much it. But I know we got some time, and I would love to hear from you, like what are sort of some other challenges that I haven't mentioned that you've experienced. I would love to hear them and talk about that. Or what are some other strategies that have been successful in working with subject matter experts that you want to share with the group? Or just any other questions? Yes, in the back, sorry.
Just a quick question. So I like to think that the learning design is universal. It doesn't matter what domain it is.
Yeah.
But have you found a particular subject area to be more challenging to work in?
Well, I think it's only because of my personal background. So I'm like a liberal arts person. So I probably wouldn't be your best match for like an AI course necessarily, unless it was, all the content was there. So I think, sort of by like, I think you can't help as a learning designer to have to like understand the content somewhat. So it's a very, very technical piece like Python. Like I wouldn't be a good match, and I wouldn't personally sign up for that. Whereas someone who's an engineer might not necessarily want to sign up for like management skills training, right? Because that might not be a comfortable fit. So yeah, I have noticed a difference in that. Yeah, Esma.
Thank you for your presentation. So you mentioned some were in the middle of the course, or the students were inside the course. There were changes in the contents for any reason. How do you handle changes in the grading, right? Which is something that we know shouldn't happen, but reality says it happens.
Yeah.
Right. So what's your strategy there? And again, what's your approach when these unexpected things happen?
Yeah, so actually, just to be clear, in the example I gave, that was sort of pre-launch, so it was easy to swap out the content. But I have encountered that scenario as well, where something is, all of a sudden irrelevant. So I think, again, it's all about clear communication. So let's say there's a course that's about vaccinations, and then there's the pandemic, and you're like, oh my God, we have to like change this. So, and that's a very extreme example, but I would just sort of head it off. Just, I would use the tools in Studio to email all the learners and let them know, like, this assessment question is now out of date, and we want to be fair to you and make sure you get a fair grade on this course. And we are very sorry, but we're going to clear out all the, responses, and here's a link to go back and retake that question or that test or that exam. I would also post it on the front of the course, and I'd probably also add a little HTML component that says, retake this question if you haven't already. And I would repeat it in multiple places throughout the course and email the learners directly. Yeah, you're welcome. Yeah, Brian.
You asked what strategies that we have that have been effective. Sometimes, as you know, time's an issue, and SMEs can take forever to drag on and get their content into you, and so that sometimes that's my biggest challenge. One of the strategies I've used, and it would depend on your budget, obviously, but you can offer a spiff for getting the work done by a certain deadline. So if they can get it done by X date, they'll get a bonus on top of what they pay. So that's been effective for speeding things up if we have a really high priority course that needs to get going quicker.
That's a great idea. That is a great idea. Other strategies, other challenges? Yeah.
My biggest challenge has actually been with my bosses who, when I first got hired, they expected the SMEs to give me finished stuff so that I could finish course plan and then for me to build it, and I would come in and I get junk.
Yeah.
And then I didn't have any like touch points with the SME, and it's taken a lot of training with them to get to know that. No, I need to be involved with an SME at the very beginning and like follow these steps. So that was one thing that surprised me, because I was like, you can't expect someone to develop something when they don't have the skills. They have the knowledge, I have the skills, we work together, and then we get great things out.
Yeah.
I have a question. Are you a certified PM?
I am not.
You're not? Okay, because you sound like one. I'm getting my PM. I was just wondering, like, oh, is she a certified PMP too?
I've done, like learning designers, we do everything, right? Like we have to design courses, we have to be project managers, consultants, whatever. So no, I'm not, but I probably should be, yeah.
You already got all the lingo down.
I know. Like I said, I was in corporate America for many years, so yeah.
Have you ever, I know you're not a certified PM, but have you ever used something like Microsoft Project or any sort of project management workflow sheet to manage a project?
So if the client has that, I will use it. Like I said, typically when they need me as a project manager, it's because they're a very small organization and they don't have one of their own, so I keep it very simple. But yeah, I have used project management software before, absolutely, but really more as a contributor than sort of like a manager. But yeah.
Do you have a template or anything you use?
I do. It's not. I'm happy to share it with you later. It's not,
Yeah, that'd be
amazing, but yeah.
Yeah.
But yeah, it does sort of outline the more specific steps of, review, time periods, course launch, like all that. So I do have one that I built before, so I can share that later. Yeah.
I'd be interested. Thanks.
Yeah, no problem.
Another question. You've talked about this is from inception to launch, but in your statement of work or other projects, have you factored in iterations? So going back to the course, reviewing it, looking at analytics, updating it. Is that part of your work at all?
Yeah, so that has been, absolutely. So and this is just a very sort of soup to nuts simple scenario, but that would definitely be like an add-on. So okay, we're going to do the first, and I did do that with a client who I worked with for like almost 2 years. So we sort of would actually did instructor-led training. So they do instructor-led training, get feedback, we'd meet, I get the feedback, incorporate it for the next one, and we would do this for several rounds. So yeah, absolutely. I mean, anyone's worked in training, we would always have our level 1 training evaluation, and then the level 2 and 3 and 4. So yes, but it's interesting because the online learning world doesn't have that sort of similar approach. And for people who don't know, I'm talking about there's this whole training methodology which hasn't really seeped into the online learning world yet, where you have like a level 1 training evaluation. I'm not going to get this wrong, so correct me. But it's basically like a smile sheet, like, did you like it? And then you have your level 2, which is some period of time afterwards, where that's going to evaluate a little bit more, like, was there any real outcome or change in that individual? Like, did they retain the knowledge from the training? And then the levels 3 and 4 evaluate more like systemic change in the organization. So it's more like, this training program you run internally on, DEI initiatives, was there an impact actually over time? So that's sort of more, is that right? What I'm talking about with the levels of training, so evaluations. Any other questions? Yeah.
This is not unique to Open edX, like many LMSs, is pretty linear in the way that it presents learners with content. And I'm curious whether you've worked on any projects where either you or the client was bringing in a strong need for more self-direction, learner choice, whether that's in assessments or literally in how content is consumed, and if so, how you accommodated it within the edX platform.
Yeah, so not easily. As we know, as I used to give training for Studio, and again, we would just say up front that this platform is very well suited for mastery learning, like you said, very, very sort of linear. However, having said that, you could structure the left menu bar and invite people to jump around, and you could insert text and make sure each module is self-contained, and you don't necessarily have to do module 1 to be successful in module 4. So in that scenario, I wouldn't necessarily sort of number them. I might do something a little different to delineate one from the other, but it would be jump around and have self-contained assessments within each module so they don't have to build on each other. But yeah, the platform isn't super friendly for that kind of scenario.
Yeah, I was going to add, actually, we're building a custom left-hand nav into ours for that exact purpose. So somebody doesn't have to follow through. They can, and so we're being careful about how we title the sections so that they're really descriptive of what's in there. So it's easy if you look at the left-hand nav, instead of just saying skill 1.1, you can actually see what's in there and then hop to it. So.
Oh, very cool. Yeah, that's a good solution. Yeah.
Thank you. So along this same line, so at one point there was that whole, Stanford had that thing where you use the verticals and you could answer a question and jump to another part of which was one way of maybe having people skip over material. But if you were doing that, do you start with your learning objectives? Is it possible to simply make that lovely, it's a table that you have, right? Yeah. And one of the things about not using a fancy tool is that's easy to expose in the very beginning in the overview. And for somebody who's doing particularly self-paced, if you see what the learning objective is and you see where that content is in the course, now you know how to skip around. And I don't know if you've tried that.
No, I mean, it hasn't been a scenario yet. Yeah. I mean, I feel like if, and are you sort of talking a little bit like more like an adaptive learning approach? Like if you sort of.
So ideally, I mean, eventually we'd like to get to, so when you're looking at MOOCs, you're looking at people who come in with all these different, when you're looking at adults,
Yeah.
you've got people coming in with a bunch of different backgrounds, right? They don't want to retake what they have.
Yeah.
So they'd like to either be able to test out of it or, somehow skip over it. Well, if you test out of it, you should be able to you should be automatically sent to whatever the next piece would normally be and either test out or whatever. And that was that idea of the verticals that you could, like I had tried some multiple choice questions to see if I could drop somebody from here's something, you're not a novice, let's put you onto this other path that is it's intermediate. And it was a little clunky, but when I think about the learning objectives that you have, if I know what my goals are for this class and I see what the learning objectives are, I can figure out which part I need as an adult, right? And then if I know where to go find those in the left-hand index or something more elegant, hopefully, eventually, then that would make that much more valuable to me.
Yeah.
Because as an adult, there's something I want, there's something I need. I mean, adult learners, the Knowles idea, and that's where I'd want to get to. So I was just curious if you had tried it, because now I think I will.
I've only done like the gating, so yes, I have made learners go through the pain of completing the assessment so they could skip over, the next section. So.
And then how did you have them skip over the next sections?
Well, I mean, you would, test it out, and then you could, not skip over, but you would have to, in order to progress, you'd have to do the assessment. But, you could say in the beginning, if you want, you can skip over this content, just take the assessment and progress, and then if you don't progress, then you can go back and take the module. So,
I see, okay.
Yeah.
All right.
It's not elegant, but...
Right. It's exactly the same thing. It's not elegant yet.
Right. Yeah.
We haven't got the...
I don't know if this is helpful, but what we've done is kind of like what you're saying. In the beginning, we'll say this section covers and list out the objectives, and then you make that objective bullet the redirect link, so you can use that hyperlink feature to jump to that section. So if you click on the list, it will bring you to that section of the course.
Yeah.
So that used to be a very painful thing to do.
Yeah. It's hard to automate, but if you're doing it manually, it's not that.
Can I just say one thing, because we're out of time, but I just want to say one thing. So I'm Serena, I'm from TCRIL. At TCRIL, we're just beginning this initiative called Modular Learning, which is, and I want to just make sure that everybody here is aware of it. And if you're not, there's a ton of information on the wiki. You can find Jenna or Dave Ormsby. But we're looking at tackling this sort of fundamental problem of learning is not always linear, and learning for mastery is not the only way to learn. So
Exactly.
I appreciate all of this conversation. It's been really interesting.
Great. Yeah, thank you, Serena. Well, thank you everyone again so much. I'll be hanging around if people have any more questions, but have a great afternoon. Thank you.